Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Chapter 1. A Voyage to Lilliput. All my life I have wanted to travel. As a young man, I studied to be a doctor, but the only thing I dreamed of was to travel around the world and see new lands. Finally, the chance came to travel when I was employed as a surgeon upon a ship that was making a voyage to the South Seas. We left England on May 4th, 1699, and our first voyage was very successful. Unfortunately, however, there was a violent storm. Our ship hit a large rock and was immediately split in half. I don't know what happened to the rest of the men on the ship. I swam as far as I could, and when I was nearly dead from tiredness, I reached land. I couldn't see any houses or people, and I was extremely tired, so I lay down on the grass and fell asleep. When I awoke, it was already the next morning. I tried to stand up, but I wasn't able to move. I was lying on my back, and my arms and legs were strongly tied to the ground, and my hair, which was long and thick, was tied down in the same way. I felt several thin ropes across my body, and I could only look upwards. The sun was beginning to grow hot, and the light was very painful to my eyes. I heard a lot of noise around me. In a little while, I felt something moving on my left leg, which advanced gently over my chest and came almost up to my chin. When I bent my eyes downwards, I saw that it was a human creature less than 6 inches high, with a bow and arrow in his hands. At the same time, I felt at least 40 or more of the little creatures following the first. One of them cried out in a high voice, "Hekina Degul!" The others repeated the same words several times, but I didn't know what they meant. I lay all this time very uncomfortably, until at last I was lucky enough to break some of the strings. At the same time, with a strong pull, which caused me a lot of pain, I managed to loosen the strings that tied down my hair on the left side, so I could turn my head a little bit. The creatures ran away before I could grab them. Then there was a great shout, and I heard one of them cry, "Tolgo, Fonok!" A moment later, I felt hundreds of arrows hit my left hand, which felt like mini needles. They shot more into the air, as we do with bombs in Europe, and some fell on my face, which I immediately covered with my left hand. I thought it would be best to lie still until night, when, my left hand being already loose, I could easily free myself. I believed I would have no trouble fighting against the greatest armies they could bring against me if they were all the same size as the creatures I saw. But things happened differently. When the people saw I was quiet, they stopped attacking me. Near my right ear, I heard a knocking sound for about an hour. Then I turned my head that way. I saw that they had built a tiny wooden stage with a little ladder to climb onto it. Soon a man went up onto it who seemed to be a very important person. He was no taller than my middle finger. He made a long speech directed at me. Though I could not understand it, I tried to tell him that I wouldn't harm the people and that I agreed to all conditions of peace. I was extremely hungry and attempted to communicate this by putting my finger on my mouth to show that I wanted food. The man understood me very well. He climbed down from the stage and commanded that several ladders should be put against my body, which over 100 of the people climbed up. They walked towards my mouth carrying baskets full of meat and bread. I took 3 loaves of bread at a time, which were about as big as rifle bullets. The people supplied me with as much food as they could, amazed at my size and appetite. I then made another sign that I wanted something to drink. They brought one of their largest barrels, rolling it towards my hand. I drank it in one mouthful, and it tasted like delicious wine. They brought me a second barrel, which I drank in the same way. When I had finished, they shouted for joy and danced upon my chest. I confess that I often wanted to grab 40 or 50 of the first ones that came in my reach and throw them onto the ground. But the memory of the promise of peace I had made to them sent these ideas out of my mind. Besides, they were now treating me kindly and with great generosity. How could I break the rules of hospitality? After I finished eating, a messenger from the emperor appeared. He climbed up my leg and walked forwards up to my face with about 12 other people. He spoke to me for 10 minutes, often pointing forwards, which, as I afterwards found out, was towards the capital city, where it had been agreed by the emperor that I must be brought. I made signs with my free hand to express that I wished to be free. It appeared that he understood me, for he shook his head and used his hand to express that I must be carried as a prisoner. However, he made other signs to let me know that I would have enough to eat and very good treatment. 500 carpenters and engineers began to prepare the greatest vehicle they could make to carry me to the city. It was a frame of wood raised 3 inches from the ground, about 7 feet long and 4 feet wide, moving upon 22 wheels. 900 of the strongest men were brought to lift me onto it with ropes and pulleys, and in less than 3 hours I was raised and placed into the machine and tied up tightly in it. 1,500 of the emperor's largest horses, each about 4.5 inches high, pulled me towards the city. All this I was later told, for while the whole thing was happening, I lay in a deep sleep, caused by a sleeping drug put into the wine I had drunk. Chapter 2. The War against Blefuscu. Near the emperor's palace was an ancient temple, the largest in the whole kingdom. It was decided that I would live there. The king's workers put 400 chains through a window of the temple, like those that hang from a lady's watch in Europe, which were locked around my left leg with 50 padlocks. Over 100,000 inhabitants came to see me, and about 10,000 of them climbed onto my body with the help of ladders. But a law was soon made by the emperor to forbid this. When the workmen decided that the chains were strong enough and that it was impossible for me to escape, they cut all the strings that tied me down. I stood up, feeling very sad. The chains that held my left leg only allowed me to walk backwards and forwards a little bit, and to crawl into the temple and lie down when I wanted to sleep. Then the emperor came to visit me. He was a handsome, elegant man, slightly taller than the rest of the people, almost as tall as my middle finger. He tried for 3 hours to speak with me, and though I spoke with him in all the languages I knew, we could not understand each other. After he left, some strong guards stayed near me to protect me from the crowds of people. They all came as close to me as they could, and some of them shot their arrows at me as I sat on the ground by the door of my house. But the guards ordered 6 of the bandits to be seized and decided the best punishment for them was to be put, tied up, into my hands. I put 5 of them into my coat pocket and made a face at the 6th as if I wanted to eat him alive. The poor man was terrified, and the army and guards were afraid, especially when they saw me take out my penknife. But they felt relieved when I cut the strings the man was tied up with, set him gently on the ground, and he ran away. I treated the rest in the same way, and I saw that the soldiers and the people were very pleased by my kindness. The emperor spent a lot of time talking about me with the wise men of his court. They discussed what could happen if I broke loose, and that feeding me would be very expensive and might cause a famine in the land. Sometimes they decided to starve me, or at least to shoot me with poisoned arrows, which would kill me, but they considered that the smell of so large a dead body might produce sickness in the kingdom. In the middle of these discussions, several officers of the army went to the emperor and described my recent behavior towards the 6 criminals, which made a very good impression on the emperor. He said that every morning all villages in the kingdom had to deliver 40 sheep, 30 oxen, and other food for my meals, as well as a large quantity of bread, wine, and water. He also ordered 600 people to serve me, who lived in tents built on each side of my door. 6 of the greatest scholars of the country were ordered to teach me their language. In about 3 weeks I had made great progress in learning their language. The emperor was very pleased and often came to talk with me. The first thing I managed to communicate to him was my desire to be free, which I repeated every day on my knees. His answer, as well as I could understand it, was that he needed some time to think about it, and that I must first promise peace with him and his kingdom. My gentleness and behavior had made such a good impression on the emperor, and upon the people in general, that I began to hope that I would receive my freedom in a short time. The people slowly became less afraid of me, and I sometimes lay down and let 5 or 6 of them dance on my hand, and the children liked to play hide and seek in my hair. I asked for my freedom so many times that the emperor eventually sent a messenger to me to inform me that it would be given to me only on certain conditions. The messenger read this out to me. First, the Man Mountain must not leave our kingdom without our permission. Second, he may not enter the city without our order, at which time the inhabitants will have 2 hours of warning to stay inside their homes. Third, as the Man Mountain walks along our roads, he will be very careful not to step upon any people, their horses or carriages, nor take any people into his hands without their agreement. Fourth, he must be our ally against our enemies on the island of Blefuscu, and do everything possible to destroy their ships, which are now preparing to attack us. In exchange for keeping all of the above promises, the emperor stated that I would receive meat and drink every day. I promised to follow these requests, and my chains were immediately unlocked, and I was free. One morning, about 2 weeks after I had been set free, Regisel, a member of the emperor's court, came to my house. He asked if he could speak with me for about an hour or so. I offered to lie down so that he could easily reach my ear, but he chose rather to let me hold him in my hand during our conversation. He began by congratulating me on my freedom, but then added, if it had not been for the present situation in the country, perhaps I might not have received it so soon. For there is danger of an invasion by a very powerful enemy, he explained. The land of Lilliput is threatened with an invasion from the island of Blefuscu, which is the other great empire in the world, almost as large and powerful as this one. The great difference between the people of Lilliput and Blefuscu is which end of an egg we should break before we eat it. In Lilliput, we break our eggs at the small end. In Blefuscu, they break their eggs at the big end. A bloody war has continued between the two empires for a long time because of this, during which time we have lost 40 ships and 30,000 of our best sailors and soldiers. Now the enemy has prepared a large group of ships to attack us, and the emperor, believing in your courage and strength, has commanded me to explain this problem to you. I asked Regisel to tell the emperor that I was ready to defend his kingdom against all invaders. The empire of Blefuscu is separated from Lilliput by water. I walked towards the coast across from Blefuscu, and lying down behind a hill, took out my small telescope. I saw the enemy ships sitting in the harbor, about 50 of them. I then returned to my house and asked for a great quantity of the strongest cable and bars of iron. The cable was about as thick as the string used in England to tie up packages, and the bars were the size of knitting needles. I braided the cables to make them stronger, and twisted the iron bars together, making hooks. After attaching 50 hooks to the cables, I went back to the coast. I took off my coat, shoes, and socks and walked into the sea. I walked most of the way and swam in the middle where it was deeper. The people of Blefuscu were so frightened when they saw me that they jumped out of their ships and swam to the shore. I took the cables with the iron hooks on the ends and attached a hook to the end of each ship, and then I tied all the cables together. While I was doing this, the enemy shot several thousand arrows at me, many of which struck me in my hands and face. They hurt badly and made my work difficult. When all the hooks were attached, I took the cables in my hand and began to pull. I easily pulled all 50 of the enemy's largest warships after me as I swam back through the water to Lilliput. When the inhabitants of Blefuscu saw me begin to pull their ships away, they screamed with grief and despair. I pulled the ships through the water and arrived safely at the royal port of Lilliput. Chapter 3. Fire in the Palace. The emperor and the inhabitants of Lilliput were excited to see me arrive in the port with all of their enemies' warships pulled behind me. The emperor gave me the title of Nardak, which is the highest title of honor among them. Soon after this, however, the emperor informed me that he would like me to bring all the rest of his enemy ships into his port. He seemed to want to make the whole empire of Blefuscu into part of Lilliput, to destroy all the big Indians, as the people of Blefuscu were called, and to force people to break the smaller end of their eggs, by which he would be the only emperor of the whole world. I attempted to change his mind about this, and protested that I did not wish to bring free people into slavery. This decision of mine was so opposite to the plans and the desires of the emperor that he could never forgive it. He mentioned it to his council, where some men, who were my secret enemies, agreed with his statements. A while later, I was awoken at midnight by the cries of many people at my door. The people begged me to come immediately to the palace, where the emperor's apartment was on fire. I walked quickly to the palace, careful not to step on any people. Ladders had already been put against the walls, and the people were using buckets full of water to try to put out the fire. But the water was far away, and the buckets were too small. The situation seemed hopeless, and this magnificent palace would definitely have burned to the ground if I had not suddenly had an excellent idea. The evening before, I had drunk a lot of wine, and I had not released any of it yet. The wine had produced a large amount of urine, which I released in such a quantity and applied so well to the proper places that in 3 minutes the fire was completely put out, and the beautiful palace saved from destruction. I returned home, sure that the emperor and his wife would be very thankful to me for what I had done. But I was wrong. I learned a short time later that the empress was extremely unhappy, and that in Lilliput it was considered a crime to make water anywhere near the palace. The empress believed her apartment was now so dirty that she refused to live there in the future. It was soon after this adventure that I received a visit from a member of the emperor's court who had become a good friend of mine. He came to my house at night, alone. Because of the great respect he had for me, he wished to warn me of a private plan which had been forming for 2 months against me at court. He told me that it had been started by Houyhnhnms, the emperor's high treasurer, who had for a long time been unfriendly to me. He had lately managed to convince the emperor that the great amount of food I required was costing the empire a fortune. He told the emperor that I would destroy the empire if the emperor did not dismiss me. My friend who had come to see me informed me that the treasurer's opinion was supported by Brobdingnag, the high admiral, who had been my enemy since my great success against Blefuscu, because his glory as a military commander was diminished. This man, together with Houyhnhnms, the high treasurer, had made charges against me of treason and other serious crimes. My friend read a copy of the document to me that my enemies had prepared. It said that I was guilty of making water within the grounds of the royal palace, a very serious crime, and that after bringing the warships of Blefuscu into the royal port, I had been commanded by the emperor to seize all the other ships of Blefuscu and kill all the big Indians, but that I had refused to obey this command. My friend told me that during the discussions about me, the emperor often defended me, reminding the court of the good things I had done for him, but the treasurer and the admiral insisted that I should be killed by setting fire to my house at night or with poisoned arrows shot by 20,000 men. The emperor, being against such a cruel and painful method of punishment, wished for some other method to be used. He decided that a gentler way would be to slowly decrease the amount of food given to me, so that I would grow weak with hunger and die in a few months. Immediately after my death, 5,000 or 6,000 Lilliputians might, in 2 or 3 days, cut the flesh from my bones, take it away in carts, and bury it somewhere far away, leaving the skeleton as a monument for the future. After warning me about this, my friend had to return home as secretly as he had come. I remained alone, feeling very frightened. I thought constantly about what I should do. It occurred to me that I was so large compared to the Lilliput population that I would surely win if I attacked them, and I might easily throw stones at the city and destroy it entirely. But I soon rejected this idea with horror, remembering the promise of peace I had made to the emperor long ago, and the favors I had received from him, and the high title of Nardak he had given me. I decided that the only option remaining was to try to escape from Lilliput and return to England. Since I was free now to walk around as I pleased, I began to take daily walks to the beach and look out at the sea. I remained in a friendly and cheerful mood at all times, so that no one would be suspicious, though I was very unhappy within myself. It was during one of these walks along the coast that I suddenly noticed, to my great surprise and joy, something that looked like a boat overturned in the sea. I took off my shoes and socks and went out to it and saw that it was a real boat, which must have been driven away from a ship by a storm. It was in very good condition and not damaged. I set sail in this boat on the 24th of September, 1701, very early in the morning, careful not to let anyone see me leave. 2 days later, I saw a ship sail on the horizon. By late evening, I came up next to the ship and saw that it was English. It's not easy for me to describe the joy I felt with the hope of once again seeing my beloved country. It was an English merchant ship returning to England from Japan through the South Seas, and the ship's crew welcomed me on board. We arrived in England on the 13th of April, 1702. During the journey, I tried to describe the land of Lilliput from which I had just come, but the captain and crew, when listening to my descriptions, thought I was crazy, and that the dangers I had experienced had disturbed my head. Chapter 4. A Voyage to Brobdingnag. Being an active and restless person, only 2 months after my return to England I left again, for I wished to see foreign countries. I sailed away on a ship headed for India. The voyage was good until we passed Madagascar, when some strong winds began to blow, continuing for 20 days. We were carried very far to the east, until the oldest sailor on board could not tell what part of the world we were in. On the 16th of June, 1703, we discovered land. The captain sent 12 men in a boat to the land to look for fresh water to drink, which we needed. I went with them in order to see the country. The men searched on the shore to find some fresh water near the sea, and I walked for a while alone. I soon began to feel tired, and seeing nothing interesting, I slowly returned to where I had left the men. To my surprise, I saw that the men had already got into the boat and were rowing quickly back to the ship. I was going to shout after them to wait for me, when suddenly I noticed a huge creature walking quickly after them in the sea. He was in the water up to his knees and was taking giant steps, but the monster was not able to catch the men. Full of fear, I ran as fast as I could up a hill, from the top of which I had a view of the country. The length of the craft surprised me, for it was about 20 feet high. I found a wide road, or so it seemed to me, passing through a field of corn. The corn was as tall as trees. Suddenly I saw one of the inhabitants crossing from the next field into this one, the same size as the man I had seen in the sea chasing our boat. He appeared as tall as a church steeple, and took about 10 yards in each step. I was terrified and ran to hide in the corn. I saw him turn his head to look behind him and call out in a voice as loud as thunder, after which 7 monsters like him came towards him with scythes in their hands. These people weren't as well dressed as the first, and they seemed to be his workers. He spoke some words to them, and then they went to cut the corn in the field where I was. I stayed as far away from them as I could, but their steps were so huge that it was nearly impossible to stay very far ahead of them as they cut the corn. Soon they were very close behind me. Exhausted, full of grief and despair, I lay down in the dirt and believed that I would end my days there. I sadly thought about my wife in England, who would soon become a widow, and my children fatherless. I regretted my own foolishness in attempting a second voyage against the advice of all my friends and family. I thought of Lilliput, whose inhabitants thought of me as the greatest being in the world, where I was able to capture a whole kingdom's warships in my hand and do lots of other things that would be recorded forever in the history books of that empire. I thought about how humiliating it would be for me to appear as unimportant in this nation as one single Lilliputian would be among us in England. One of the workers came very close to where I lay, and I was sure that with his next step I would be killed under his foot. When he was about to move again, I screamed as loudly as I could. The huge creature stopped, looked around for a moment, and then noticed me as I lay on the ground. He picked me up between his finger and thumb and held me up to his eyes. I tried not to move as he held me in the air about 60 feet from the ground, although he painfully pinched my sides. I placed my hands together and spoke some words in a quiet and gentle tone, for I feared that at any moment he would throw me onto the ground, as we usually do with any little horrible creature. But I was lucky. He seemed to like my voice and gestures and looked at me with curiosity, amazed that I was speaking, although he could not understand me. He put me gently into his coat pocket and immediately ran with me to his master, the man I had first seen in the field. The farmer looked at me carefully. He put me softly on the ground, and I walked slowly back and forth to let the people know I did not want to run away. I took off my hat and bowed to the farmer. He tried to speak to me, but I couldn't understand anything he said. I answered as loudly as I could in several languages, and he often lay down and put his ear close to me, but without success. We couldn't understand each other. He put me in his pocket and carried me home to his house. He called his wife and showed me to her, but she screamed and jumped back, as women in England do at the sight of a toad or a spider. However, when she had watched my behavior for a while and seen how polite and friendly I was towards her and her husband, she was no longer afraid and even began to like me. A servant brought in dinner, and the farmer and his family sat around the table. The farmer put me on the table, which was about 30 feet from the floor. I was terrified and stayed as far as I could from the edge to keep from falling off. The farmer's wife cut up a bit of meat for me and crumbled some bread and put it in front of me. When dinner was done, the farmer went out to his fields and left his wife to take care of me. I was very tired, which the woman noticed, and she put me on her bed and covered me with a clean white handkerchief. I slept about 2 hours. When I woke up, I lay for a while resting. Suddenly, 2 rats crept up the curtains and ran backwards and forwards on the bed. One of them came up almost to my face, and I jumped up frightened and pulled out my sword to defend myself. They attacked me on both sides, and one of them grabbed my collar with its front feet, but I stabbed my sword into its belly before it could hurt me. It fell down, and the other one, seeing what had happened to its friend, tried to escape, but I managed to cut it on the back with my sword as it ran away, making its blood flow. These creatures were the size of wild pigs and extremely fierce. If I had not kept my belt and sword on me as I slept, I surely would have been torn to pieces and eaten. I couldn't drag the rat's body off the bed, where it still lay bleeding. It was too disgusting. When the farmer's wife came into the room, she was shocked to see me covered in blood and quickly picked me up and held me in her hands. Then she told the maid to pick the rat up and throw it out the window. Chapter 5. Performing for the Crowds. The farmer had a 9-year-old daughter who began to take care of me. She had a cradle for one of her dolls, and she hung this cradle inside her wardrobe for me to sleep in, to be safe from the rats. Her name was Glumdalclich, and she gave me the name of Grildrig. She made little clothes for me and gave me lessons every day in the language of her country. She was very kind to me, and I was only able to survive in that country because of her care and affection towards me. It now began to be known in the neighborhood that my master had found a strange animal in the field, smaller than a mouse, but exactly shaped like a human creature, which acted like a person, seemed to speak in a little language of its own, had already learned several words of their language, walked on 2 legs like a human being, was friendly and gentle, would come when it was called, and would do what it was asked to do. Another farmer who lived nearby and was a good friend of my master came to visit in order to find out if this story was true. I was immediately put upon the table, where I walked as I was commanded, pulled out my sword, put it away again, bowed to my master's guest, and asked him how he was doing, just as Glumdalclich had instructed me. My master's friend was a great miser, which was later proven by the terrible advice he gave my master, to show me as a sight on a market day in the next town. Glumdalclich, my little nurse, told me about it. She held me close and cried sadly, for she was afraid something bad would happen to me, and she thought it would be humiliating for me to be shown to the public for money. She said that her mother and father had promised I would be hers, but now they were treating her like they had the year before when they had given her a lamb. As soon as it was fat, they sold it to a butcher. My master, following the advice of his friend, took me in a box the next market day to the neighboring town, along with his daughter. The box had a little door in the side for me to go in and out, and a few holes in the top to let in air. We stopped at an inn, and I was placed upon a table in the largest room. My nurse stood on a stool near the table to take care of me and tell me what to do. My master allowed only 30 people at a time to see me. I walked around the table as the girl commanded. She asked me questions with words she knew I understood, and I answered in as loud a voice as possible. I turned around to the whole crowd, bowed to them, and made some speeches I had been taught. I took out my sword and moved it about in the air and drank some wine out of a small cup. That day I was shown to 12 different groups of people, always going through the same actions till I was nearly dead from tiredness. Those who had seen me gave such wonderful reports about me to the rest of the people in the town that crowds were nearly breaking down the doors to come in. My master announced publicly that he would show me again the next market day. On the return home, I was so tired after entertaining the crowds for 8 hours straight that I could hardly stand or speak. But I didn't have any rest at home, for all the neighbors from 100 miles around, hearing about me, came to see me at my master's house. I was busy every day of the week, all day long. My master had discovered how much money he could make for me and decided to travel around with me to all the biggest cities of the country. Brobdingnag came with us, carrying me in a box tied around her waist. We spent 10 weeks traveling, and I was shown in 18 large towns. Finally, we reached the capital city. My master rented a room not far from the royal palace and sent out advertisements describing me and my tricks. I was shown 10 times a day, to the wonder of many people. In a few weeks, the tiring tricks I was forced to do every day made a large change in my health. The more money my master made for me, the greedier he became. I became very weak. The farmer observed it and, concluding I would soon die, decided to sell me to make as much money for me as he could. While he was thinking about this, a messenger came from the royal palace, commanding my master to take me there immediately to entertain the queen. She had heard reports about my wonderful appearance and the tricks I did. The great tricks I did. The queen was extremely delighted by me. She held out her little finger to me, which I held in both my arms. She asked me some general questions about my country and my travels, which I answered as clearly as I could. She asked me if I would like to live in the palace, and of course I said yes. She then asked my master if he was willing to sell me. He, who believed that I was so sick that I could not live another month, was willing to sell me and demanded 1,000 pieces of gold, which were immediately given to him. I begged the queen that Brobdingnag, who had always treated me with so much care and kindness, could be allowed to live in the palace too, to continue to be my nurse and teacher. The queen agreed, and the girl was very excited. The farmer left, saying goodbye to me. I didn't answer him, but only bowed coldly. The queen observed my coldness, and when the farmer was gone, asked me the reason. I told her that the only thing I could thank the man for was not killing me immediately when he had found me in the field, for he had made money by treating me like an animal, and I had become very ill by having to continually entertain crowds every hour of the day. But I told the queen that I no longer felt afraid of bad treatment now that I was under her protection. I was already beginning to feel much better now that I was with her. Chapter 6. At the Palace. A carpenter was commanded to build a wooden box that would be a bedroom for me. It had 2 windows, a door, and 2 closets, like a beautiful English bedroom. The board that made the ceiling could be lifted up and down, and a large bed was put in. The queen enjoyed being with me so much that she couldn't eat dinner without me. A little table was put for me next to the queen's plate, with a little chair to sit on. Brobdingnag sat near me to help me. I had a set of silver dishes and plates that were the same size as the dollhouse dishes you can see in a London toy shop. The queen always put a bit of meat on one of my dishes and loved to watch me eat. The king liked to talk with me, asking me about the manners, religion, politics, and education of Europe. I gave him the best descriptions I could, and he listened very carefully. He often picked me up in his right hand and laughed at the things I told him. He would say that it was very funny that even in such a tiny creature as I, there could be titles and distinctions of honor, and that the people of my country built little nests and holes that they called houses and cities. When he talked in this way, my face grew hot and red, for I was angry to hear my great country being laughed at. But even I laughed at myself when the Queen held me in her hand and stood in front of a mirror, and I could see both of us together. There was nothing more ridiculous than the comparison of our sizes. The Queen often criticized me for being cowardly, and she used to ask me whether the people of my country were all cowards like I was. The reason was this. There were a lot of flies in the kingdom in summer, and these disgusting insects, each of them as big as an English pigeon, bothered me during my dinner with their constant humming and buzzing around my ears. They sometimes landed on my food or on my nose or forehead. They smelled terrible, and I could easily see the disgusting sticky liquid which enabled them to walk on walls and ceilings. I had a lot of trouble defending myself against those terrible animals, and couldn't stop myself from jumping up with fear when they tried to land on my head. My solution was to cut them to pieces with my knife as they flew in the air, and my skills at this was admired by everyone. Besides the large box in which I was usually carried, the Queen ordered a smaller one to be made for me, about 12 feet square and 10 feet high, for traveling, because the other one was too large for Glumdalclitch's lap. This traveling box had a window in the middle of 3 of the walls, and each window had iron wire placed over it to prevent accidents in long journeys. On the 4th side, which had no window, there were 2 strong hooks, through which the person who carried me put a leather belt, which he put around his waist. I would have lived very happily in that country if my size had not exposed me to several ridiculous and frightening accidents. Glumdalclitch often carried me into the palace's garden in my smaller box, and sometimes took me out of it and held me in her hand, or put me down on the ground to walk around. One afternoon, Glumdalclitch put me down on some grass to walk by myself, and went to another part of the garden with her friends. While she was gone and out of hearing, a small white dog belonging to one of the gardeners began to run around near the place where I sat. The dog, following my smell, came right up to me, took me in his mouth, ran straight to his master, wagging his tail, and put me gently on the ground. Luckily, it had been so well taught that it carried me between its teeth without hurting me or even tearing my clothes. But the poor gardener, who knew me well, was very frightened. He gently took me up in both hands and asked me if I was okay, but I was so amazed and out of breath I could not speak. In a few minutes I recovered, and he carried me to my little nurse. She was very angry at the gardener because of his dog, but she and the gardener remained quiet about what had happened, because the girl was afraid that the Queen would be angry. I also thought it wouldn't be very good for me if everyone found out about what had happened to me. This accident made Glumdalclitch never want to let me out of her sight again. I had been afraid of this decision for a long time. I loved to have a bit of time to myself every day, so I didn't tell her about some other little unlucky adventures that happened in those times when I was left by myself. Once, a raven flying over the garden tried to grab me, and if I hadn't pulled out my sword and run under a large flower, it would have certainly carried me away in its claws. Another time, walking to the top of a fresh molehill, I fell up to my neck in the hole, and had to lie later in order to explain why my clothes were dirty. And once I hurt my right leg against the shell of a snail, which I happened to fall over as I was walking alone and thinking about England, which I so painfully missed. Chapter 7. Return to England. Throughout my stay in Brobdingnag, as the country was called, I hoped I would someday become free again, though it was impossible to imagine how this could happen. The ship in which I sailed was the first one ever to come close to their coast, and the king had given strict orders that if another ever appeared, it should be brought on shore and carried to him with all its crew and passengers. He wanted to find me a woman of my own size, so we could have children, but I think I would rather have died than have my descendants kept in cages and perhaps sold as curiosities in the kingdom. I was treated with great kindness, and the king and queen loved me, but I was living in a way that was very humiliating. I wished to be among people with whom I could talk equally, and walk about the streets and fields without fear of being stepped on and killed like a frog or a young puppy. But my freedom came sooner than I expected, and in a very unusual way. I had now been in this country for 2 years. At about the beginning of the 3rd year, Glumdalclitch and I went with the king and queen and the royal family on a trip to the south coast of the kingdom. I was carried, as usual, in my traveling box. I wished to see the ocean, which could be the only way for me to escape, if it would ever be possible, but Glumdalclitch was very ill and had to stay in bed. I pretended to be a bit ill too, and said that I needed the fresh air of the sea, and asked permission for a young servant to take me there. I will never forget with what unwillingness Glumdalclitch finally agreed to this, nor the strict orders she gave to the boy to be careful with me. She began to cry at the same time, as if she somehow knew what was going to happen to me. The boy took me out in my box about half an hour's walk from the palace, towards the rocks on the seashore. I asked him to set me down and told him I wanted to take a nap, so he shut the windows of my box to keep out the cold sea wind. I'm not sure what happened next, but all I can suppose is that the servant, thinking nothing bad could possibly happen to me, went among the rocks to look for birds' eggs. I was suddenly awoken by a violent pull upon the ring which was attached to the top of my box to make it easier to carry. I felt my box lifted high in the air and then carried forward with great speed. I shouted several times as loud as I could. I looked out my windows, but could see nothing but clouds and sky. I heard a noise just over my head, like the flapping of wings, and then realized that an eagle had grabbed the ring of my box in its beak, planning to let it fall on the rocks to break it open, like a tortoise in a shell, and then pull out my body and eat it. After a while, the noise and flapping of wings increased, and my box was tossed up and down. I heard several bangs, and then, all of a sudden, felt myself falling straight down for over a minute. My fall was stopped by a terrible crash, after which everything was dark for another minute. Then my box began to rise higher, and I could see some light through my windows. I realized that I had fallen into the sea. I suppose that the eagle which had flown away with my box was chased by 2 or 3 other eagles, and was forced to let me drop while it was defending itself against the rest, who all wanted to eat me. My box was so strongly built that it didn't break when it hit the surface of the water. During this time, I often thought of my dear Glumdalclitch and wished to be with her. I felt sorry for her, for surely she would be very sad to find me gone, and the king and queen would be angry with her. Surely no other travelers had been under as much stress as I experienced at this time, expecting every moment that my box would be smashed to pieces. Even if my box survived and did not fill up with water, what could I expect but a miserable death from cold and hunger? For 4 hours I was in this situation, expecting every moment to be my last. While I was in this miserable state, I heard a noise on the side of my box where the rings for the belt were, and soon it began to feel like the box was being pulled along the sea. This gave me some small feeling of hope, though I was not able to imagine how this could be happening. I called for help in a loud voice in all the languages I knew. I tied my handkerchief to my walking stick and put it out the hole at the top of my box, waving it several times in the air, so that if any boat or ship were near, the sailors might realize that someone was shut up in the box. I eventually felt the box being lifted up into the air slowly. I shouted again. A great shout answered mine, filling me with joy. Then I heard someone calling through the hole loudly in English. I answered, begging for help. The voice replied that I was safe, and that a carpenter would immediately come and cut a hole in the top of the box large enough to pull me out. I answered that it was unnecessary, and all that had to be done was for one of the crew to put his finger in the ring and take the box out of the sea and into the ship. Some of them, when hearing me talk so wildly, thought I was crazy, and others laughed, for I hadn't realized yet that I was now among people of my own size and strength. The carpenter came, and in a few minutes cut a hole about 4 feet square, then let down a ladder, which I climbed up, and from there I was taken into the ship in a very weak condition. The sailors were all amazed and asked me 1,000 questions, but the captain, an honest, friendly Englishman, observed that I was very weak and took me into his cabin, gave me some food, and allowed me to rest in his own bed. I slept for many hours, but was constantly disturbed by the dreams of the place I had left and the dangers I had escaped. However, upon waking I felt better. I ate with the captain, and he explained that he had observed my box floating in the sea through his telescope. Seeing what looked like a floating house, he ordered some men to go out to it in a boat and to pull it to the ship with some long cables. I told the captain all about Brobdingnag and the adventures I had had there, but he thought my brain was disturbed and told me I should rest for the remaining part of the journey to England. I was overjoyed when I finally saw my country and family again.